I want to also acknowledge our Deputy Prime Minister and all Ministers of State, our Chief Secretary, and all heads of departments who are also here this morning. I want to acknowledge also all members of our diplomatic family who are here, led by the United Nations Resident Coordinator. Thank you very much for your presence. Our medias who are here to remit information to our people far and wide, and of course the people of Bougainville and Papua New Guinea. Mr. President, it is my distinct pleasure to once again welcome you back to the place of the Era Covenant. You were here with me in one or two occasions with our teams from both sides as we convene to ensure we are progressive in as far as the 2001 peace agreement is concerned. And I'm pleased to be here once again in this important meeting, the meeting of our Joint Supervisory Body. And I want to acknowledge that whilst it has been quite some time since our last meeting, I want to acknowledge our two ministers, our National Minister for Bougainville Affairs, the Hon. Manasseh Makiba, and his Bougainville counterpart, the Hon. Ezekiel Massat, for their consistent work. And I have been advised that since our last meeting, they have met over 5 times to ensure matters are progressed. You will recall that when we last met, President Toroma and myself, we did agree that there was a need for an elevated discussions on the next steps in the Bougainville peace process at both political and administrative levels. In the resolution of that meeting that took place here at APEC House on 31st of July 2023, we agreed that the mechanisms to bring forward the results of the Bougainville referendum would be by way of a sessional order. The resolution also empowered the two ministers to engage in the consultations on the nature and form of the sessional order, and in particularly matters relating to the question to be put to Parliament in as far as the Bougainville referendum results are concerned, the number of sessions required for Parliament for the Parliament to deliberate and the question be put, the voting majority that we required for Parliament to endorse the results, and any agreed steps, as well as the broader manner in which the results would be tabled. Those were matters that were raised in those meetings and are matters that were passed on to our two ministers to be in consultations. I have been briefed by Minister Makiba, and I'm advised that 5 of such consultation meetings have taken place between our two ministers. I'm advised that the ministers have endeavored to reach agreement, but it is clear that our two governments cannot agree on the voting majority that should apply for Parliament to decide on the next steps, nor has agreement been reached on the question that should be put to Parliament for a vote. As Prime Minister, I am duty-bound by our national constitution. Whilst the provisions of Section 342 of the Constitution are broad in nature, they do not describe a set process that Parliament must deploy. This means that in determining the voting threshold for any decision that Parliament may make, we must be guided by legal advices with respect to the approaches that should be followed, or as entailed in our Bougainville Peace Agreement and also our Constitution, that consultations can also be taking place to advise us on what must be done. Mr. President, I want to advise that through this forum that as head of the executive government, we've tried our absolute best to seek advice far and wide. The state on record has received advice affirmed by our Attorney General and also from learned people who read law better, like Sir Salamo Injia, on what must be done. Those advices affirms that any decision in respect to Bougainville Independence or any steps must adhere to a 2/3 absolute majority rule prescribed under Section 17 that applies to any amendment to our national constitution. This is because any decision to grant independence to Bougainville will have a bearing on Section 2 of our national constitution, which defines the area that compromises the current Papua New Guinea we have. This would in turn require a constitutional amendment, and matters dealing with constitution, as I am advised and as I read into law, requires constitutional majority numbers to get it passed. Another point, rather, that I feel necessary to raise is the legal nature of the referendum. The referendum, for the benefit of both sides, is sanctioned by our national constitution. The organic law on peace building outlines in detail the arrangements that is applied to the conduct of the referendum. The referendum, to refresh all our memories, was held in 2019 under the watch of the United Nations and has been certified to have complied with those constitutional requirements. It also assessed to have been free and fair and conducted to the highest standard. The constitutionality of the referendum has never been called into question. As a government, we have always recognized our obligation under Constitution to ensure the referendum is held. But the very important point I want to stress at this point is that the Bougainville Peace Agreement, which paved way for the amendment to our national constitution and paved way in that to ensure the referendum was mentioned, was required, and was held, is really to end the Bougainville conflict. Makes it clear that the outcome of referendum, in my view, and in the advised view, to me, is that it is non-binding on the state. Well, however, having said this is an issue that we must progress. This is not a decision that I must make alone as Prime Minister. This is not a decision that I must, or the party that I lead must make alone. It must be a decision of the National Parliament, as Section 342 of our National Constitution, subsection 2, more so, explicitly requires us of, that the National Parliament must make decision. It is unambiguous. It is clearly spelled out in the 2001 peace agreement led by the then Prime Minister Hon.James Marape and the team of leaders on both sides who said clearly around a table right after the Bougainville conflict and ceasefire was made and for the construct of the peace agreement to come into effect. The unambiguous term of National Parliament must and will and shall make decision in Section 342, subsection 2, is something that as Member for Tari, as Prime Minister of this country, cannot ignore. The 118 members of our National Parliament will have a voice, will have a discussion on the matter when it's brought into Parliament. A decision on Bougainville's political future must be a collective one, where each members of Parliament exercising their own conscience will discuss, decide, and cast a vote. And given the constitutional implications of such a vote and the implication that could have for our nation, it is only right that the constitutional vote threshold be applied, and this is something I want to say at this juncture, that our friends from Bougainville have voiced a strong dissent. And I do understand where they're coming from. Mr. President, you have your people's aspirations to protect and promote. Over 97.7% of people of Bougainville have voted not for anything less than political independence. Whilst we may propose economic independence and autonomy of the highest form, Mr. President, I want to place in this JSB and our consultation meetings this morning that you have advocated strongly at all times that it is nothing but political independence for your people. And I want to also impress that whilst I do bear sentiment and have my own views as a member for Tari, but as Prime Minister of this country, I have a sovereign responsibility to ensure that the due process is followed through and our constitutional requirement of our country is adhered and followed through. Mr. President, our individual sympathy to the cause must find its meeting place in our national constitution. The construct of our national constitution took place before our collective time in office, It is a construct prior 1975. It is a construct that happened in the Constituent Assembly on 15th of August 1975 accepted the Constitution, passed the Constitution, and Section 2 of our Constitution defines the sovereignty we have today. But having said this, Mr. President, the 2001 peace agreement is one of the world's best peace agreements. And I want to thank those who were in the 2001 peace agreement for the wisdom that now, as we look back retrospectively, comes out very, very clear. It allowed for referendum, and one of the questions was independence for Bougainville. It also allowed for post-referendum consultations to take place as Melanesian leaders for us to find what is good for all of us, respecting Bougainville and respecting the whole of our country, one of the most diverse nations on the face of planet Earth, speaking many, many languages, over 800 of them, living under one unity called Papua New Guinea today. And so it gives respect that there must be post-referendum consultation. It also gives respect to the supreme lawmaking assembly in our country, the National Parliament. The National Parliament has a role in processing the Bougainville Peace Agreement. It must make decision as Section 342 entails and visits and points us to. National Parliament must make decision. I noted the Bougainville Peace Agreement make mention to National Parliament shall ratify the decision. The Constitution makes it explicit, National Parliament shall make decisions. Whatever the decision the National Parliament make is something that I cannot preempt. But we must clarify the processes of how National Parliament has a handle on this one, and what happens beyond National Parliament having a handle on this matter. The Constitution is silent on the finer details of the process, the last leg of how National Parliament deals with it. It just simply says National Parliament will make decision as leaders, but it also allows for consultation. So as leaders on both sides now, it is up to us to allow for consultation, and I am advised, and I also read that the Constitution allows for moderator in the event there are some impasse of any type. And Mr. President, I am committed to the Era Kone Covenant that we must table the result as soon as practically possible. And Mr. President, just as Papua New Guinea now stands ready to embrace the 97.7% results of the vote, I put to Bougainvilleans, as National Parliament, as the supreme authority in Papua New Guinea decides over the results, are you willing to accept the final outcome of the National Parliament? This is a honest question we all should be answering, and it's a question before us. As we excuse the media after, Mr. President, you have made your speech, we will and we must get into these serious discussions. We cannot allow it to be turning in and turning around all the time and put it to next month or the next year or the next generation. God has given us this task to have a handle on, and we must attend to this as part of this meeting's agenda as we go into deep discussions later on. The agreed time frame has passed. The question must be put to the Parliament, but what is the question? What is the manner in which it is brought into Parliament? I do want to point from my opening remarks that the two ministers have agreed that the sessional order is by way of a simple majority. That is something that is accepted, but what happens beyond a sessional order is a constitutional matter. Constitutional matter requires constitutional majority, and I want to point to us that as comprehensive the peace agreement may be, and the insertion in our national constitution by Part 14 talks about the highest level of autonomy for the Bougainville people. 23 years have passed since then. We must work in areas that we must work on, including bringing the result to the floor of Parliament, including fully drawing down on all powers. And I am ashamed to say that of the 59 powers that was envisaged to be transferred to Bougainville, only 11 powers have been transferred. That is not good on our part. National governments for the last 23 years have not fully transferred all powers. And I do not need to chest beast, but on record, James Marape as Minister for Education in 2009, under my watch, education was the first function I transferred to Bougainville as Minister. And I call upon every minister from the National Parliament here today, pick up the Bougainville Peace Agreement, pick up the National Constitution. Powers that is within you must be fully, and at the earliest, be transferred down to Bougainville. My call on Bougainville to be independent ready, my call on Bougainville to be economically independent is consistent, but they must be functional. The part of the reason why the vote maybe was as high as 97.7% is an indication on Guinea not willing to fully empower Bougainville in not just money terms, but every other functional power that needs to be transferred and drawn down. Bougainville must be strong and resilient. The government must be functional. It must function as if it is totally independent until then. And with the light of readiness on the part of Bougainville, can National Parliament fully sit down and assess Bougainville in total enlightenment. And I want to propose, Mr. President, as we go into other discussions, you are entitled to speak on matters concerning Bougainville, and I will be sitting down and listening to your conversation. Every other work that needs to be done must be done. But a key issue facing us now, Mr. President, is the fact of bringing the referendum results into the floor of Parliament. National Parliament has been informed. We are ready to take the results into the floor of Parliament, but inside calls for consultation also. We can take the results in today, or you can choose for us to defer taking the results into the floor of Parliament, and we can engage in consultations on other matters, but there must be a time in which National Parliament has a handle on this matter. And I want to conclude by asking members on both sides, let us not fear this matter. As Melanesians and as Christians, in following suit from my call in Wabek, that we must think from the other side's perspective, our national side to think from Bougainville's perspective, that they have aspired to be politically independent. And I want Bougainvilleans also to think from the side of Papua New Guineans. Whilst we sympathize with Bougainville, we have a national sovereignty to defend. We cannot allow precedents to set up where one can use guns and go to war and then call for truce and then call for referendum for independence. That is a dangerous precedent that is set before us. And the Parliament of Papua New Guinea needs to consolidate on the fact that no part of our country must have referendum for independence. It's a matter that is urgent before us. Before 2025, we must ring-fence the rest of the country as we also work on the Bougainville matter. And in my view, that is something that is facing us right now. The greatest fear, as I conclude, is the fear of the unknown. But each step we take into the future will ease the fear in itself. Bougainvilleans must not fear our national parliament. And as national parliamentarians, we must not fear Bougainville. Let's find a meeting place where we do not have the aspirations of Bougainville, but at the same time, we preserve our national union. And I want to inform Bougainvilleans, as the chief spokesman of Papua New Guinea, I did said, as high as Mount William is, the referendum, simply means the referendum results is timeless. It will be here forever. I know politics define that you are time-bound, but let's step out and look beyond politics. The construct of the peace agreement gave us a window of 15 years to work. Maybe leaders today can construct another time capsule, a time period, where we will work together if Parliament has a handle on Bougainville and doesn't dispense the questions put into Parliament in the manner in which Bougainville feel Parliament should treat the Bougainville referendum results. I want to give assurance to Bougainville, your aspirations will not be killed in a one Parliament session. May God bless Bougainville, may God bless Papua New Guinea as you truly find a middle ground that doesn't hurt Bougainville, but that also preserves the sanctity of the union we have. God bless Papua New Guinea. God bless.